Sadly, it took only 32 episodes of this podcast into the second year for us to already come around again with another story of how weather doomed a flight. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in year 2 from the Weather Network in Canada. On August 2nd, 1985, Flight 191, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, was viciously and abruptly knocked out of the sky by what is termed as a microburst. Let's explore that now, this day in weather history. A microburst is simply sinking air. That's it. It's a natural part of a thunderstorm. There's updrafts, there's downdrafts, there's rising air, sinking air, area of low pressure. But there are storms that you see that cover whole regions or even states. This monster, however, is less than 2.5 miles or 4 kilometers in scale. In most suburban Canadian cities, that's only about 2 blocks. With that kind of scale, some can pose a threat to life and property, but they are so small in scale that they will likely also miss a lot. But regardless of that, all microbursts are a significant threat to aviation. They may not be tornadoes, but they are as deadly and destructive to anything up there in the atmosphere, and that is exactly where airplanes are at their most vulnerable. A microburst of forced air can whip up to 150 miles per hour or 240 kilometer per hour wind speeds in the most extreme cases. Cases that would make it possible to knock a passenger plane out of the air like a fly swatter, sending it hurtling to the ground, which is what happened on this day in weather history. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. And oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event, from when it happened, in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. So, what happened? This Delta Airlines was a regularly scheduled domestic flight from Fort Lauderdale, Florida to Los Angeles with a quick stopover at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. You can already tell by my tone and setup of the story that this flight did not make it. The weather forecast for DFW was posted as the possibility of widely scattered rain showers and thunderstorms. But still, another report warned of an area of isolated thunderstorms over Oklahoma and northeastern Texas. The flight crew, as part of their pre-flight briefings, would have reviewed these notices, and they knew exactly what they were looking at along the way. But as the aircraft flew past New Orleans, Louisiana, a Gulf low strengthened. The flight crew decided to deviate from the intended route to make the more northerly approach to their destination at DFW. Then everything went bonkers. The tower radioed wind speeds to Flight 191, and they adjusted the flaps accordingly while lowering the landing gear for their approach. But then lightning started firing off across the sky. This storm was very much alive and very much awake now. The rain was quick to follow and take all visibility for the cockpit right along with it. The flight recorders captured the moments before the final descent. The captain feared that control might be lost and ordered that the plane be pulled up. His words, "Push it up, push it way up." Then, at 6:05 p.m. local time that night, Captain Connors barked out an order laced with expletives, and it was then that the plane was knocked clear out of the sky, and this time, it would not recover. A short time afterward, with the aircraft descending at more than 50 feet per second, that's 15 meters per second, going directly into the ground, the proximity warning system began a series of audible warnings. The aircraft's landing gear ground into a plowed field 6,336 feet or 1,931 meters north of the runway, nowhere close, almost 2 kilometers away from their intended destination, and 360 feet or 110 meters east. This airliner was way off course, yet somehow remaining structurally intact, while now speeding along the ground at a dangerously high speed, and as it was now on a collision course with a Texas State Highway number 114. Terrifyingly and tragically, this is what happened next. First, the aircraft struck a highway streetlight while its nose gear touched down on the westbound lane of Highway 114, skidding across the road at a dizzying 200 miles per hour. That's about 320 kilometers per hour. This L-1011's left engine struck a car, sadly killing that driver instantly. The nightmare for the crew and passengers, however, was far from over. The passenger liner hit 2 more streetlights on the eastbound side of the highway and then began coming apart at the seams. Everything from row 34 through the front and the cockpit was disintegrated. In the end, of the 152 passengers aboard, 128 were killed in the crash. 12 of the 24 survivors were seated in a cluster near the tail of the aircraft. This day in weather history. Tomorrow is August 3rd, and we go back to 2018 for the Alonza, Manitoba tornado. It was a massive EF4. And after the F5 from Ely, Manitoba, people there were likely fearing the worst and believing they were either cursed or now part of what should be recognized as a Canadian tornado alley. It's all tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.